Many of you know that for the last 7 or 8 years I've been asking my guests to give me a biography of themselves in 7 words that might or might not define them, a haiku of sorts. And these are the 7 words of our guests. Richard Powers gave me these 7 words. On learning we're not here alone. Oh. I heard Tom's laugh, it's great. And Tom McGuane submitted these 7 words to me. Curious resident of Earth counts every day. Now I will welcome to the stage Tom McGuane and Richard Powers. Before they begin the conversation, Richard has asked to read an introduction to you for this evening. Please welcome them.
We can't see you. I find myself out on a precarious tightrope. On the one hand, I'm compelled to share my grateful awe for the publication of a collection containing half a century of consummate stories, and to celebrate the culmination of a long career that has added incomparable insight, eviscerating humor, raw truth, and deep wisdom to American letters. On the other hand, if I make too much of Thomas McGuane's standing as a national monument, I run the risk of attracting the attention of the Secretary of the Interior. Fellow Montanan, I'm afraid. You really don't want to do that these days. This is the 3rd time I have met McGuane. The first was when we were both getting inducted into the American Academy of Arts and Letters. Unlike Tom, I'm still waiting to hear from the National Cutting Horse Association Hall of Fame and the Fly Fishing Hall of Fame. And how does one single person, well, we'll get into that later. At the Academy induction ceremony, I expected McGuane to be the Teddy Roosevelt of a multiple Mount Rushmore of intimidating figures I'd have to meet that anxiety-inducing day. He turned out to be unnervingly charming, with the kind of easy grace that made whoever he was talking to seem about 20% smarter and funnier than they really were. My then editor and date for the day developed a mad crush on him, and she was not the only one. The second time we met was at a reading in Livingston, Montana, a favorite venue in McGuane world. The reading had been long postponed because snows of mythic proportion, which are a regular feature of life out that way, had shut down the entire interstate between Livingston and McGuane's ranch near Big Timber. But the night that he read was one of those perfect Greater Yellowstone evenings, ripped from the first week of creation. Those of you who have never been to southwestern Montana won't be able to imagine the feeling invoked by hearing McGuane read his own magisterial words against the backdrop of that troubled but still paradisal land he has made his home. The story he read that night told of a woman who fails to stop a man from killing a wolf and who subsequently loses her ability to live with other human beings. But the real gist of those words, so surprising but so inevitable, had to do with remembering ourselves through the power of seeing and feeling and articulation. For my part, I find it hard to articulate what an event Cloudbursts is. It collects in one volume a life's work 1,000 pages long. Don't drop it on your foot, right? 45 stories, every one of which exercises a genius for life itself. It's an immense journey through times and places, zigzagging across an entire continent in the better part of a century. It reveals the unfolding of a master sensibility that started out fully formed and has continued to grow over the decades, spreading both downwards and upwards, like a massive cottonwood by a clear stream. Virtuoso invention and eccentric description combined with superb dry fly casts, resembling those of the eponymous old man who liked to fish, straight as ever, tight, probing expressions of a tidy streamcraft, such simplicity and precision. Then there's the uncanny authority and expertise. McGuane inhabits the real daily work of people as if he himself has spent years running car dealerships, practicing law, building houses, breaking horses, inseminating cattle, and piloting yawls across the storm-battered Caribbean. He knows words for equipment I didn't even know existed, and he combines them in sentences of such stark beauty that every page would fill me with twisted envy if it weren't for the relentless injections of instruction and delight, the growing pain and enduring pleasure that each paragraph brings. I read these stories over the course of many blissful days and nights, cackling uncontrollably, talking out loud to myself, and otherwise exhibiting a wide spectrum of worrisome behaviors. And at every expanding denouement, I found myself wondering why my heart was breaking over awful plans gone hideously wrong, and my viscera twisting in knots at the terrible choices of even the most unprepossessing lowlifes and losers. In part, it's because McGuane has me every time feeling there but for the grace of God. And in part, it's because he knows, as Philip Roth puts it, that we really start to love someone when we see them being game in the face of the worst. Permit me one more great line, this one by Bernard of Clairvaux. What we love, we shall grow to resemble. For half a century, in nonfiction, as well as fiction, short and long, McGuane, lover of the Bighorn and Boulder and Yellowstone, of the Bridgers and Gallatins and Absarokas, of the wayward NorCal coast, of the grim Dakota plains and the rolling grain wastes of the upper Midwest, of the salt flats down in the Keys, of the deep South and working-class neighborhoods in crumbling old eastern cities. The lover, most of all, of us endlessly thwarted, endlessly hopeful American dreamers and schemers drifting across that map. Thomas McGuane has come to resemble this land, brutal but beautiful and still spacious. His stories cut to the heart of America, a country of failure and fraud and dysfunction, but also a vast capacity for forgiveness and reinvention. He is as wise, distilled, and merciless as any writer I know. There's no other way to say this. Ryan Zinke, come and get him.
Wow, thanks, Rick. That can't possibly be true. I don't really even know how to react appropriately to such generous words from a writer whose works I esteem as much as I esteem the works of Rick Powers. So when trying to dream up a response to those kindly remarks, I'm reminded of Hemingway's visit to the dying Pio Baroja. He brought him a sweater and a bottle of whiskey, and he said, "Allow me to present you these things. You are a great man, while I am only an adventurer." And Pio Baroja was stumped to how to respond, and finally he said, "Caramba!"
Fantastic.
Thank you so much. I'd love to think I deserved such kind treatment from somebody who writes as you do.
So, all your hostages to short form Fortune in one volume, or pretty much all.
Right, so far, yeah.
Yeah.
Over the years, I've had people tell me, and I resisted their remarks, that they preferred my short stories to my novels.
Well, I was going to say that when I published my first novel, you were already this established figure, but I thought of you as Tom McGuane, the novelist. I mean, you burst on the scene with these 3 virtuoso books in like 4 or 5 years.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. And it seemed like you were a novelist moonlighting in this short form.
Right.
But then over the years, the figure and ground have in some way, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems as if you've gone from being a novelist who also writes stories to feeling like that may be the thing that interests you most right now, and that you've really become this central figure in the short form.
Well, I always felt that I had to write novels to learn enough about writing to write short stories.
How interesting. Wow.
They're really much more demanding, and probably the sort of impure motive is the fact that I've noticed so many wonderful, mostly young short story writers coming along, and I looked on them and their work with a kind of envy and emulation, and saw. I mean, there's so many of them now, and they're so great. I mean, it's a golden age of short story writers. And I guess I felt I wanted to tag along, but also. I was diagnosed as ADD in various ways in school. I was a learning challenge, and I was very impatient. I didn't want to be indoors at all. And as a young person, as a reader, I was passionate about reading, but I didn't want to stay there very long. I wanted to go back outside. And some of those things, I think, propel you along. But now there are so many instances of let me back into this. There are so many long novels now that could have been short stories.
Yes. Yeah.
And post David Foster Wallace, it doesn't take much to make an 800-page book. So I still think that Flaubert's Le Mot Juste approach to writing is the right way to go. There are very few people, frankly, who can hold my attention at length the way you can as a writer of ideas. And I can say plainly that you're the only writer of ideas I know who never loses his terrestrial touch.
I may be the only one with a contract with a commercial publisher at this point in America. I'm not sure.
Well, but anyone who doubts that, please read Galatea 2.2 and think of how you might set out on such an abstruse journey and end up moving the reader so powerfully. That's the way a writer of ideas ought to be able to work, or stop doing it. And Rick has that space, I think, in American literature to himself now.
You know, the evening is titled The Long and Short of It, presumably because you can break a heart in 5 pages. It takes me about 200 to get my main protagonist on stage. But I feel like there's a kind of, as you were talking, I was thinking there's a Boyle's law of inverse relationship in the two forms. You know, that
right.
as the volume decreases, the pressure increases tremendously.
Oh, that's a great thought.
You know, and if you think of it as a per word formula, if the average length of a novel runs between 80 and 120,000 words, and the average short story would be 5,000, 5 to 8 or something. Yeah. That you can permit yourself a certain amount of infelicities along the way in the long form, you know, whereas everything has to be right on the mark when you're dealing with something.
But that is the virtue of the novel, too. I mean,
Sure.
I'm sure you know the old description of the novel as a manuscript of a certain length with something wrong with it.
Right.
In that sense, short stories are a little bit more like plays. If you go to the theater, you know how sensitive you are to a dead moment. I mean, literally a 90-second dead moment in a play can destroy it.
Forever. Yeah.
A novel doesn't really have that problem. In fact, the disquisitions and sometimes the random things in novels are really the best parts of most interesting parts of them.
What about pleasure for you? How do you feel yourself as a different person when you're working in one form over the other? Does one make your day more satisfing?
Well, I think we talked about this a little earlier, which is you're trying to find that quasi-euphoric state where you're inspired, which is not easily attained, not long-lasting usually. And I think that process is the same in both forms. I mean, you're trying to work forward through a narrative without lying to yourself about whether it's dead or alive. We talked about Robert Stone's rule for revision, which was, as you look at what you've done, if you think there's something wrong with it, there is.
Yeah.
And you have to, the severity that it requires to look at your own work is kind of hard. And when you're a young writer, it's even harder because the subjectivity of the work is such that you either in love with it or you hate it, and you don't have many nuances in between the two.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let me ask you this. The oldest stories in this collection were published in the early 80s, so presumably, in your mind and hand even before that, and the most recent are from the day before yesterday. So you're looking back. I mean, you had to go back and read them all, presumably, for to put the volume together.
I did,
yeah. That must have been a trip. To travel that distance. You're a different human being. You're a different writer. The world is a profoundly different.
Psychoanalysis is what. Yeah, I mean, it was, some of it's kind of painful. I mean, it was way worse than going back and looking at the house you grew up in.
I bet. Yeah.
On the other hand, you also get the same feeling you get when you go home to your hometown, which is, wow, everything's so small. But I think the thing that was the most challenging thing about going back through all the stories was to decide, who wrote these stories would I most like to disown.
Yeah.
And then you have to make a sort of executive decision about that. Say, well, this is it. This was me. I mean, as we talked earlier, it's like looking at your high school yearbook picture and saying, I know that has my name under it and my various reasons. That's not really me. I had blonde hair, beautiful tan. So.
But did you get this a little bit? I feel this with, my 12th novel is coming out next month. I'm really anxious and insecure about number 11. Do you know what I mean? But once they drift downstream a while, you can re-own them. You can say, gosh, I'm glad I wrote my juvenile stuff when I was young, because there seems a poetic justice to that.
Well, you do cross, I don't think you're old enough to have crossed this line, but there's a point in which you say, well, this is me.
Yeah.
It's too late now.
Yeah.
This is what I got, dude.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of wishful thinking in early work. This is what I wish I wrote like. This is what I wish I was. This is who I wish I was. This is the family I really wish I had had. But that sort of goes away. It's not that those are bad things, because they can be quite energizing.
Right.
But you don't rely on them throughout a long working life.
You see a trajectory?
I'm sorry?
Do you see a trajectory in terms of concern and technique and so forth? And how
I do. I think I'm just a little bit more skeptical of what I write maybe than I once was. I've been fortunate with editors. I think I've had some good editors, smart people who called into question some of my practices, made me defend them, firm them up if necessary, or discard them. And I love to revise. We talked about that. I love to revise. I love editors. I love people who will kind of question what I'm doing, because it makes me see it more clearly.
Yep.
So all those things are also these kind of process things. And my old teacher, Wallace Stegner, once said to me that, you should always remember, you should always write if you're a writer. And he said, because a big part of writing is actually knack, but writers never admit that.
Yeah.
And that kind of fluency that you get for writing over a lifetime or over that year, working regularly that year, that kind of fluency is actually an aperture to your subconscious.
Yeah.
Instead of laboring over how can I get going today, or there's nothing in there. Why should I try to pretend?
Right, but if you have the inertia of 40 years of
Right.
working, then you
And
don't-
it comes and goes.
Yeah.
The smallest amount of neglect will make it go away for a certain amount of
Sure.
time.
But as you're talking, I think you also have to be on guard against facility in the negative sense.
Yeah.
That you're simply writing the story that you wrote last year.
Right.
And
That's
how do-
or not knowing that you're doing
Yeah,
that. That's even more terrifying. That's what finally happened to Hemingway.
yeah.
He didn't realize that he'd done that.
One more question on length and form. The shortest story in this collection is about 3.5 pages, and the longest is about 47, 48 pages.
Right.
So that's a factor of 15.
Yeah.
Do you know when you're setting out where you're going, how long it's going to be? Is there a huge difference between writing something of 1,000 words and writing
It's those
something?
pulses, you
Yeah.
just don't know where they're coming from. When the story you're talking about came out, I forget where I was posted, but I saw Joy Williams right when it came out, and she said, "God," she said, "you just let it roll." I said, "Yeah." I said, "I wish it happened more often."
Yeah.
But I think you need to apply a certain reliable insecurity to anything you're writing, and so you get the feeling that, I don't know what it would be in an earlier format, but the feeling that you're boring people, or that you're lying to yourself, or that this has no reason to live.
Yeah. But that's a horrible daily precarious
Yeah.
balancing act between trust and suspicion, self-trust
Yeah,
and
right.
self-suspicion.
And suspicion can just destroy the whole
Sure,
operation.
if you're weighted too far one way or the other.
Yeah. I think that's probably the most normal writerly dysfunction, is self-doubt that rises to the point where you can't blacken pages anymore.
It doesn't help. I mean, I'm thinking of, what if you were 20 years old again? Or, I taught the Stegner workshop that you took many years ago, and I taught it fairly recently. To come into a world where the suspicion is pre-imprinted on you, to work, and to know that within weeks you're going to be 3.65, at Amazon or wherever it is, that sense of
Unbearable.
Yeah, I don't know what this generation is going to need to hold that at bay. I mean, we get it after 20 years in the trenches, and certain kind of refrains that become inescapable in the way that our stuff is read. But to have it at the gate.
I know. Well, we're talking about the Stegner Fellowship too, right? Well, when I was in there, I remember we would read our stories to be critiqued by other people in the class. I couldn't bear to do that, and I would always trick somebody into reading my story, and I would pull my coat over my head out of this sweeping sense of shame. Why did I do that? Why did I let him read those things in front of other people?
Right.
But that, in a funny way, in the long run, served me well. I mean, I was never confident about what I was doing as a young writer. And that feeling of fear, it was sort of electrifying in a way.
Sure, but electrifying can kill you. I mean, if the voltage is high enough. But there's no coat big enough to cover your head now. You know what I'm saying?
Well, it is a big head. I can get my head under it, but I can't get my ears in there.
I mean, for a younger writer, there's just no buffer you can put between yourself and the instantly available, ubiquitous judgment of the world.
Oh, I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, I'm thinking of Robert Stone lately for some reason these days, and he taught at the University of Hawaii one season, and most of his students were Asian. And he said they were so mannerly that he couldn't really get anything going because they were not as enamored of insulting one another as Americans.
So yeah,
he tried to induce viciousness in the class, and he got
get a little
nowhere.
edge going. Well, viciousness is not in short supply in contemporary America,
No, it's
so I
not.
don't think that's a problem that any beginning writer is going to have to worry about. Will you permit me a fishing analogy? A fishing analogy.
Right.
This is not a fawning attempt on my part to get you to nominate me for the Fishing Hall of Fame. But in the Smokies where I live, fishermen go after 5-inch brook trout.
Right.
Right. In tiny pools, they have to creep up behind rocks to get close enough. And they're doing this on a 1 or 2 weight rod. And out where you live, you got 30-pound, 2.5-foot brown trout monsters that you catch on enormous rigs.
Right.
Is there something to writing a short story, to using that minimal, that can make it as thrilling?
I think so. You know, I certainly feel that way if I read Hills Like White Elephants or Girl with the Dog, you know, those kinds of things. They always had an immense power. It stays with you for days and days. But the process of actually doing it, since we're going to stick to this fishing analogy, which I love, anything to do with fishing.
Am I close at all on this?
Yeah, I think a little bit. I remember reading an old English fishing book, and the author had been challenged to describe what the experience was like. And he said, well, I go out and I make a cast, and then I pay very close attention, and I await the consequences. And I think we're not sure what's going to happen. I mean, we don't know what we're going to penetrate when we set out on this. We don't even know if it's going to be a short story.
In fact, the consequences can take many years to develop.
Right.
Yeah. So from the long and short of it, I thought another possible title for the evening would be Hicks from the Sticks. I think this may be the first time in this series where the combined populations of the towns where the 2 people on stage live may be less than the number of people in the audience.
Yeah, I think that's right. My hometown has 6 people.
I was thinking, you know, I looked up McLeod, and you got to wonder when they don't even put the population in.
Yeah,
you know.
I know.
I was thinking with you and Lori here that you might be in negative numbers out there. Right now, right?
Well, we live outside of town. So
Okay, right.
3-day-a-week mail service and other humiliating services. Well, you know, we're bipolar about that, really. I mean, we live out there in a natural world, which is what drew me to that, to see what some admirer of Charlie Russell said, the look of the world, the way God made it.
Yeah.
And it's very nice to live in a world that is not either curated or manufactured. And so I've liked that. On the other hand, I love talking to people. I love seeing people. I love talking to other artists. I like thinking about what they're doing. I get starved for that sometimes. So it's really not a perfect solution. But these days in Montana, anywhere you throw a rock, you will hit a writer. And so there's pretty good company still out there. And really, when you think about those things, how many really friends can you really have that you have anything like a substantial relationship with? 1 or 2 or 3 or something?
And usually early on in your life, I think it gets harder to do.
Right.
But you touched on what my question was attempting to segue into, which is this calculated risk of solitude and isolation as a creator.
Right.
I mean, in a way, I used the word eccentric in the intro, and etymologically that just means you're not at the center, but you're looking at the center in a way that the people in the middle of things can't see it. It takes a kind of outsider view to get to the heart of that a lot of times. But extended and continuous solitude and isolation runs the risk anyway.
Right. Well, there are 2 sides of it. One is there's a danger in living in the choir.
Right.
And in fact, I would say through the early and middle years of my life, most writers I knew who lived out there felt tremendously neglected by the sort of New York-centric world. One of the benefits, I think, of the digital age is nobody seems very far from anybody else anymore. So there's that.
It's changed the contract of being isolated entirely.
Yeah, I know. And not just because, you know, you can work from home, but because everybody doesn't seem so far away. When I was a kid so long ago, I didn't know anybody who'd gone to Europe.
Right.
My grandkids have all been there, but
And
Europe seems incredibly far away. And California, I remember when I got the Stegner Fellowship, I drove out there in my old Jeep. I drove over the Sierra, and there was a sign that said, "Welcome to California." I thought I was going to have a heart attack. I didn't know anybody who'd done that from Wyandotte, Michigan.
Right.
So.
But you also remember, in terms of the destruction of space and the compression of space and distance, the age where the family would line up to make the long distance call and nobody could speak more than 15 words because
that was
it was
long ago.
$5 a minute or whatever it was.
The image that I really remember was Eudora Welty's book, A Writer or One Writer's or something. She said that she had relatives in Ohio, and they drive up from Mississippi to Ohio. And she said the thing that she remembered that no longer existed, that every town had a face like a human face. You'd pass a town, there was the church, there was the outside, there was the courthouse. Each one of them had a face. And it was interesting. You could kind of understand where you were in the journey by the looks of these places and how the architecture changed. We don't have that anymore. It's all run together.
Yeah.
I'm reminded of this remark a friend of mine told. I hope he didn't make this up, but this elderly couple were in Kissimmee, Florida, and they were arguing about how to pronounce the name of the town. And so they finally decided to go up to the little boy at the cash register and ask him to settle the name of the town. So my wife and I are arguing, you're going to tell us how to pronounce this, and one of us is going to be right and the other one's going to be wrong. So very carefully, very slowly, tell us the name of this place. And this little boy said, Berger King. So that's the new America.
It's also a marvelous, that is a marvelous way to bring this to the stories. I know very few writers now for whom place is still absolutely singular and central in terms of what the story is doing, where place is actually a character. Mm-hmm. Because of this homogenization, the late capitalists,
right.
The younger writer is much more likely to feel an indifference to the actual locale. Whereas I think of these 45 stories, there were probably only one or two where I couldn't say precisely what town the story was taking place in. That's an extraordinary observation. Now, you're strongly associated with Southwest Montana now, but what's interesting in terms of trajectory, for the collected collection now, it's almost like a planchette on a Ouija board. Mm. At the beginning, you're going all over the map. In the first couple collections, and gradually, mm-hmm. Southwest Montana becomes the place. The planchette stops on yes or whatever.
Oh, that's fascinating. I didn't think of that, but I think that's exactly right.
Yeah,
right.
Of the 45 stories, 25 of them are from Southwest Montana, but most of those are sort of post 2000, I think.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's probably where my comfort zone in the place sort of set in. It takes a long time to, if you don't live where you grew up,
to actually inhabit.
Yeah. And I had a sort of mixed background that way. My family are all from Massachusetts, and my father went to Michigan to work, and I kind of grew up there, but we always went back to Massachusetts.
As in the story Miracle Boy.
But I always sort of wanted to move out west. I'm not sure why. Probably watching cowboy movies or something. But I think that's really the case. Where did we depart on that? Where did we? Oh, yeah, just places. It's kind of a central thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, a couple observations on that too. I mean, as I was reading this, I was thinking of a kind of inversion on Faulkner's famous observation about home.
Yeah.
Where it's when you have to go there, they have to take you in.
Oh, yeah, that's such a great thought too.
The West, in a way, and you are the quintessential Western writer. For me and for many. But your West is not. I mean, your West is a very internal and complicated and troubled place. In a way, I was thinking the West is when nowhere else will take you in, it's the place you have to go.
Yeah, I think that's kind of right. You see a lot of there's a demographer's term called the rate of persistence. I'm sure you know that term, which is how long people stay in an area after they move there. And the West is still the greatest area of turnover in North America. I mean, people go there with a sort of an idea. In some ways, it's culturally kind of a cold place. My wife is from Alabama, which is a very warm place. It has all sorts of things that we could complain about, but it's a very warm, humanly very warm place. Whereas in the West, the sort of claiming mentality, the prior appropriation mentality, makes people very wary that you're going to try to steal the place, or you're going to be a claim jumper in some ways. Almost all the writing, and there's some very good writing by the writers who were born and raised in the West. I mean, it's the recitations about when they got there, when Grandpa got there, and how long they've had the deed, and it's like they're saying, it's sort of what I used to call prior appropriation memoirs. In their last
Carpetbagging of some kind. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you have to be 3 generations before you're really a Westerner.
Yeah, probably, and it's different. I mean, we think of Updike as a New England writer in many ways, but he's not. It's a little bit easier here, but the West is much more guarded that way because I know people in Big Timber, Montana, which is 100 miles where we live, which is 100 miles from Billings, and I know older people who've never been to Billings.
Jeez.
And then people will come in to vote from the valleys, the nearby valleys, will come in to vote and say, "I'm just here to vote. I'm going right back." as though somebody's going to snatch the place while they're away.
Wow.
And then a friend of mine used to deliver lumber for the local lumber company, and he said he'd go out to those ranches and there'd be nobody there. The dog would bark at him, and he started unloading all the wood, and he'd look up in the window and he'd see the couple peering out through the curtains. Didn't want anybody to, if you're going to pull something funny, they wanted to observe you. So that takes some getting used to. And
are you still a Midwesterner? Is there anything
I
left
think
in
mentally I'm a Midwesterner. Yeah. To a degree, I grew up in an Irish Catholic New England household.
Right.
I mean, my father did say "pack the car," and they made these grotesque attempts to get rid of their Boston accents through the years, and it never worked. So I really that was the whole household culture.
Yeah.
But right beyond those walls, distinctly Midwestern. And in fact, I feel very drawn to sort of the Midwest as an idea where people are not proud of being a cultural center of the world or a financial services center of the world or having the most beautiful mountains in the world. They have to have other reasons to value themselves.
Right.
It's a uniquely Midwestern thing that I still value.
Me too. So, point of view. You probably did not do what I did, just go back and count first versus third.
Yeah.
What would your estimate be?
Boy, I'm afraid to know. I think they probably got more first-person-y as we went along. Is that the case?
I think that's true chronologically,
Right.
but overall it's 21 first to 24 third.
Oh, really?
So yeah.
Wow.
Although it's interesting too, because the psychological impression when you do a dramatic monologue,
Yeah.
and the story is unfolding in that voice, it's.
Is it better?
Well, I don't know. See, here's the thing, and here's what I used to teach my students, that it's not really just a question of first versus third.
Right.
Because third, you can choose your focal distance so profoundly that when you really closely focalize third, it starts to approximate first person.
No, I know that. And I was very drawn to that as a young writer. And it has greater freedoms.
Right.
I mean, the first person is a very confining voice to write in.
Yeah.
And you have to pull all sorts of things to get the detachment you need to actually move the story from place to place. But it seems that when you start a story in any form, it's something that Sherwood Anderson used to talk about getting the pitch right.
Yeah.
And you try all sorts of little things, and finally the pitch seems right. And at that point, it dawns on you that it's in one person, one perspective or another.
So you have actually in the course of very efficient flipped from
you're trying to, and I don't know how you cogitate this, but at some point it becomes sort of clear.
Yeah.
And then then you go on with it. But I will say this: that I mean, when you set out to write something in the first person, I mean, you're really working in a straitjacket.
Right, and it has to do with the classic degree of reliability.
Right.
Right. Although that can also come in third as well. But there's another formula that I used to trot out in the classroom a bit too, which is this great quotation from Mikhail Bakhtin, the Russian literary theorist. And the line is, every act of depicting is itself a depiction.
Yeah.
And you can picture this as if somebody's out in the yard with a flashlight, you can see what's going on in his head by what he's shining the light.
He shines the light on. Yeah.
And when you think of the classic first-person performances in American letters, well, let me tell you about my friend Jay Gatsby.
Yeah.
It's really not entirely about Jay Gatsby, right? I mean, the
right.
And there are marvelous.
How about Call Me Ishmael?
Same, right?
Yeah.
I mean, yeah. There are moments where you do this characterization where the act of depicting is hugely memorable, but partly because it's shining back on the person who's doing the depicting. Like in this story, the two brothers, Crowfair,
right.
and the adult brothers are learning something about their mother in her final days of mental decline and dementia, and it's told by one of the brothers.
Right.
And there's a, he says at one point, the narrator says about his own brother, he says, my brother had a general theory of life, which was the usual Darwinian dog-eat-dog stuff, with power trickling down a human pyramid whose summit was exclusively occupied by discount orthodontists like himself. So it's a virtuoso act of the narrator representing his brother, but what we're seeing is, this guy revealing himself unwittingly.
Right. And his feelings toward his brother very distinctly. Yeah, that's right.
So again, this question of comparative pleasure, or how do you locate that voice and find those traits and mannerisms and values? We humans love gossip.
Yeah.
And there's something brilliantly evocative of the gossip impulse in the best short stories, not just you, but anybody who's telling this endless sense of pecking order. In fact, a lot of developmental or evolutionary biologists, as suspect as that field might be, say the reason we really needed big brains. I mean, predators and
right.
They've already solved the complex problems of surviving in the world with fairly compact hardware.
Right.
We need the extra stuff to keep track of who's up and who's down, who owes us things and who we owe things to.
Right.
This endless social evaluation and pecking order, those are huge cognitive and calculation loads.
Even for Americans who do it less than other people. I mean, if I have English friends, and I'm always astounded at how they're ranking each other all the time.
Yes, yeah.
I have a friend. We were just talking about this earlier. I can't remember with whom, but I have a friend who I'll see when I go home, who lives in England. His name is Berger Ivanovich, and he's very much an Englishman. And he went to one of these formal British shoots, and he met this old English blue blood, and who introduced himself, and he said, "How do you do? I'm Berger Ivanovich." And the Englishman said, "Oh, what a lovely old English name that is." I mean, we wouldn't do that here.
Right.
We do other things, meaner things. They're sort of sub rosa.
Yeah, the knife is less visible. Yeah. But I guess what I'm saying is, when I read characterizations that are so compact and so robust, I mean, partly as a novelist, I want to know how you did it, so I can get that in my tool chest. But I think also there's just that natural human prurience. You just want to know, are you spilling the beans on a close friend? Or, you know what I mean?
Right.
And everybody knows intellectually that every really great character is some amalgam or some hybrid of,
Right.
witnessed lives and invented lives.
Right.
But when they pass that certain threshold and they're coming off the page and you say, I know this guy,
Yeah.
then you also want to know, does McGuane know this guy? I mean, really, is he going to get a letter bomb from him?
Right.
Right.
It's a close call. I remember I wrote a wholly invented character, a sort of a misbehaving emergency room nurse who was up to some sort of sexual no good on Flathead Lake, Montana.
Right.
Which I thought, this is safe. This is 400 miles from my house. I got an enraged letter from a nurse on Flathead Lake. She said, I think it's shocking that you put me in your story without attribution or asking my permission. I had no idea who she was.
Wow.
So, I mean, that's the risk of writing a plausible character, I think. There's a book coming out we talked about earlier, this book, phenomenal book, it's called Cherry, and it's written by this interesting guy who's a medic in Iraq, horribly PTSD, depressed guy, came back, became a heroin addict, robbed 10 banks, and is in prison, and he's written a brilliant novel. He also taught himself 4 languages while he was in prison, and he'll be out in a couple of years. I read this book, and I mean, it's a harrowing book, but I don't know if it's true or not. I don't know if it's a novel.
And would it make a difference to you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
What you almost never do is put yourself in the story, with maybe the exception of some of the stories from a child's point of view. And I have no basis to say that except knowing your personal history and looking at a story like Miracle Boy or Ice or something like that, to know that the venues anyway and some of the gross details may line up. That
I think
maybe,
that's how I work in a way. I'll think of something that I can't seem to escape a thought. It's sort of a tiny moment in my life, and I don't know what it means. And some of them are very old. For example, I'll share one with you now that I've been thinking about for 60 years. I don't know what to do with it. I was in the living room of the house I grew up in, and my mother was standing with a curtain pulled to the side of her face. And I went up, I was 5 years old, and I went up to her and I said, Mom, what's going on? And she said, your father is so mean. I have no idea what this means. But I've been trying to write the story that starts from that my whole life.
Wow. But you said that also about the story Riddle, which closes the collection, where you have this, where you see this haunting thing,
right?
And it stays with you for decades, and that one did come to fruition.
It did, and it's because I did this kind of daredevil thing with it, which is I remembered this thing so vividly, I had no idea what it meant, and I said, instead of spending the next 5 years wondering what it means, why don't you write down exactly what you remember happening in the most complete detail. This is a matter of a few paragraphs.
Yeah.
And when I got through doing that, I had this tremendous amount of energy for the trajectory of the story, which was unknown to me, but I had lots of energy to follow it around the corners. Right. And at the end of it, I remember Deborah Treisman, my editor at the New Yorker, said, it's a riddle. She said, you say it's a riddle. I said, yes. And she said, well, what's the answer? And I said, so I reminded her of this thing that a poet once said who worked for an insurance company, Wallace Stevens, and he owned a Picasso. And his colleagues from the insurance company came around to see him, and they said, Wallace, we like you very personally as a friend, but we don't understand your poetry. And so he led them all.
All my friends say that about me.
So they led him all. He led this group of businessmen to this Picasso, and he said, "See this? This is a Picasso. I don't understand this painting." He said, "But I'm sure that Picasso did." So, and it was my way of wriggling out of Deborah's perfectly good question.
Right. So I'll trot out Philip Roth again, since I have been thinking a lot about him recently. He actually, I do believe, is working out of the complementary area where his own sensibility is often at the center of the protagonists that emerge. But he says, that he wrote in order to be freed from my own suffocatingly boring and narrow perspective on life.
This is Stevens? No, who's this?
Roth.
Oh, Roth.
Yeah.
Wow.
To be freed from my own suffocatingly boring and narrow perspective on life and to be lured into imaginative sympathy with a fully developed narrative point of view, not my own. But I would actually point to your stories. How do you inhabit somebody who shares nothing with you, not the socioeconomic niche, not the geopolitical,
Right.
Well,
I think it's worth trying. We spend, hell is other people, right? So we spend all our time trying to think, why are they not just objects, sort of baffling objects?
Right.
What is it that's going on there that makes me feel certain that they're humans? And then you start doing that. You say, what is it driving them? What's motivating them? Getting involved in that and what their inner lives are like. And then you end up sort of inventing a character which you imagine you would only explore.
Right.
So that's just kind of writerly stuff.
Yeah. You do something. There are a few stories. House on Sand Creek is an example of this. I love this. There's I read that Fellini was a great favorite of yours somehow.
Yeah, that's true.
There's a way in which this is Montana Fellini. There's a small number of people, maybe one or two at the beginning of the story, and whatever relationship they're in isn't quite working. There's an instability, and they start improvising.
Yeah.
And gradually more people get sucked into the negotiation.
Right.
And suddenly it's a half dozen people with the most outrageous set of reciprocal, crazy,
Yeah.
And yet sometimes it doesn't hold together.
Right.
Sometimes it turns quite dark. But on some occasions the arrival point is, well, we need the eggs,
Yeah.
and this.
Well, that one, what sort of lit me up about that story was the idea that this guy goes to this elaborate apparatus to try to figure out that his wife has been unfaithful to him. And he's successful. He's figured all this stuff out by the fact that she never went to the restaurant she claimed.
Right.
She couldn't identify the toppings available on the pizza.
Right.
So anyway, she comes home at night, and he's sort of got her. He's sort of sitting in the doorway waiting for her to open the door and come into the room. And he sort of busts her, basically, for it. And so what could she do? At this point, here's what she does. She goes, well, how do you want to leave it?
I know. It's the most chilling reply. But that actually kind of leads me to this question of, because it seems like at that point, she should be, somehow that he had asserted the upper hand in power, and she comes back with this zinger that can be read just about any way you want, and it's an amazing reversal. But that raises this whole question of endings and how much you must enjoy them. There's a sci-fi term that those writers like to use called the slingshot ending.
Oh, I don't know what that is.
Yeah, it means that you're telling the one story, and you get to that last paragraph, and something happens right at the end to modulate it into another place and another key, and suddenly you understand the stakes of the story in an entirely different way.
Oh, that's a great idea.
And almost like what composers would call the Picardian third. You have this, piece in a tormented minor, and the third is just raised on the last chord, and you end on a major chord,
right.
Which you do in a story like Miracle Boy. But in a story like the one that you just cited, which was actually On a Dirt Road,
right.
But there are many other stories where the ending just you introduce a level of expansiveness or confusion or reversal. Casserole, another example,
Right.
where there's a big reveal at the end.
Right.
It's a first-person story, and you as the reader are following along blithely, inhabiting this guy's space, and then you hit that last, and the hair on the back of my head went up when I read this story, because it's like, now I understand what I was reading. Do you see those first? Do you work toward those waypoints, or?
Well, the risk is, I mean, when you take these kind of leaps, these narrative leaps that are sort of daredevil leaps, that at the end you have the effect you just described, which is what you hope for, or you're like somebody standing on a street corner talking to themselves.
Yeah.
And that's the challenge. I mean, and you have to understand the risk, and you have to be prepared to fail if it doesn't work, and then hopefully somebody who cares about you will tell you that the story sucks.
Right. So it's not necessarily that you can see that ending when you're setting out. You often have to write your way to it.
You have to write your way to it. I mean, one of the things that's kind of baffling about writing is that you almost never end up where you thought you were going.
There's that. What's the Retke Villanelle? We learn by going where we have to go.
Right. You make the path by going.
Right.
I think that's it. I mean, you have to assume that you have something to say, and beyond that, you have to assume there's something in your memory and your subconscious that's worth investigating.
Yeah.
And it's not always true. I mean, I was interested in your approach to writing, which is so idea-driven. This latest book, for example, is a grand example of it, which is the idea that you start out with basically a kind of a grand scheme. And I don't know whether you feel you're living up to it as you work, because you never really quite lose your contact to things that people who could not have had those concepts on their own can still understand.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't leave us behind with that. I don't have that. I mean, I have convictions, but I don't think I have that many ideas as such. I thought I had 3. And then my wife, who's a very generous-hearted person, said that was overstated. So,
well, for a long time, the Samuel Goldwyn, if you have a message, use Western Union.
Right.
Ideas have for a long time been considered anathema to a deeply satisfying aesthetic experience, and we've actually subscribed fairly wholeheartedly to this notion that a story has to mean, by allowing the character to escape the author, to escape the form, to escape the plan. So it is a strange and lonely path to say, well, there are a lot of different ways to read and a lot of different kinds of satisfaction that come from reading, and they're not all generated from that aesthetic.
one of the things I think that's happened in recent years with so-called literary fiction was that we all became so enslaved to Raymond Carver's approach to things, where it was so...
Who himself was coming out of Hemingway a little bit, right?
Right.
I mean, there's a genealogy there.
But it was so photorealistic in
Yes.
some ways.
Yeah.
That for the same reason that Raymond Carver couldn't write a novel, there was not enough about that broke out of the kind of quotidian so that the story could really go
Right.
very far.
Right.
Updike was a photorealist in many ways, but he had more fluidity and range of movement, you know.
Right. But the idea that you could put an entirely that there is another continent that we haven't actually been on for a while,
Right.
which is not that driven by those concepts of realism.
Right.
And allegory may be too strong a word, but there are other you and I happen to have the thrill of seeing the first edition of Don Quixote an hour and a half ago.
Right.
I mean, there is an entire strain of literature that
Yeah.
comes out of this notion that no, realism is not the way, into the deepest recesses of the heart. And what I love about these stories is they flirt with the tension between those modes of psychological consistency and coherence, and then these sudden moments of cosmic expansiveness.
Oh, well, maybe so. I mean, like I say, I only have 2 or 3 ideas.
The other thing that you do, not dissimilar to this notion of colliding realism with mystery or riddle or some other mode of apprehension, something more spiritual, is the collision of registers. I mean, the stories that are comic and the stories that are really dark and brutal are not necessarily different stories.
Mm-hmm.
And you do that Polonius, tragical, pastoral, historical,
Right.
mashup.
Right. Well, my early heroes like Cervantes and Gogol, and I used to read these comics, Soviet writers like Ilfin Petrov, the 12 Chairs, all those things. They always seemed to, you really never knew which kind of a turning the story was going to make.
Right.
Your comfort level was, it was not like watching, a conventional comic movie where you just, which I like to do, which is look back,
Right, and everything's
fart jokes, my favorite. Jim Carrey movies,
Right.
My wife and daughter and I went to see, what was that movie, Huh?
Dumb and Dumber. Yeah.
Dumb and Dumber. And Lori didn't want to go. She thought this is incredibly stupid. And my daughter, Annie, and I, we never had so much fun. I thought, this is genius. When they gets on the airplane and says, when do they turn out the no farting light? I thought it was paradise.
Well, what I found to be genius in the stories was this bait and switch, where there's this moment where laughing at someone turns into this odd sense of self-accusation.
Yeah.
And suddenly I'm indicted and I have to take my own judgment.
Right.
Do you know what I'm saying?
Yes, I do.
Yeah.
But also, as you know, when you feel comfortable that you have the reader in hand, there's an urge to make the reader sort of uncomfortable. Because the enemy of what you're trying to do is sort of complacency.
Right.
Either the imagined complacency of your reader or your own complacency as a writer. So if you think that person out there, that faceless person, is getting pretty relaxed, it's time to stick a pin.
Sure. What I have is, my little note to myself is that fantastic moment when burlesque at a character's expense becomes almost like a sacrament of participation. Mm-hmm. Where guilty as charged. Do you know what I'm saying? That there's just that the laughter becomes the seduction for realizing that I've done that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember one time I was at some sort of social gathering and there was somebody laughing and laughing and laughing, and the person next to me turned to me and said, "Can't you hear the scream in that laugh?"
Yeah.
And that's that kind of tonality.
Yeah, that's right.
It fascinates me.
Yeah, that ambiguity.
Yeah.
Yeah. In fact, I also have written the word mystery here, but I'm not sure what it means.
I don't either, really. I don't think I'm not logical enough to generate kind of plausible mysteries. I haven't read very many detective novels or crime novels, but I'm always sort of fascinated at how logical they are and how well organized they are in terms of tricking me along to keep reading the next. And I really don't have that. I don't.
But what you have is a willingness. Maybe not unlike what I was talking about with the slingshot endings, but a willingness at any given moment. I mean, in the story Partners, for instance, the last line is given to the client who says, "Am I understanding this?" Remember that? Right? Am I catching everything here?
Right.
There are, and riddle is another example where you say, you don't actually need to know how to resolve all these variables.
Right.
Or a better way of putting this is, in the great dialogical short stories, person A comes on and says, this is the way things should be, and these are my values, and the world is messed up for reasons, 1, 2, and 3. And you say, that is right.
Yeah.
And then person B comes on and says something entirely inimical, Actually, this is the way the world is, and this is my, and the reader saying, yes, you're right.
Yeah, I know.
And they're not, they can't both be right, but here you have moved the reader from one moral position to another and not resolved it for them.
Right. Well, I must say must be intuitive, because I don't think I have the intellectual capacity to do that on purpose. But what I try to, of all the mentally complex novelists of all time, certainly Henry James probably.
Oh yeah, he's a great master.
He's probably in first place. And somebody said,
Yeah.
Is there a rule for the novel? And he said, really, there is only one rule. And he said, it has to be interesting. That is really the challenge of any writing.
Yeah.
We can approach it theoretically or in any other way we want to, but the real bottom line is it interesting? Is it not interesting? Is it interesting? Is it boring?
So what is interesting?
Yeah.
What makes something interesting?
Yeah.
Who's up and who's down is always interesting to
Right.
people, and what comeuppance somebody gets is always interesting to a
Right.
person.
And violence. There are easy ways to be momentarily interesting, but it just doesn't really have legs. It doesn't sort of go anywhere.
Right. A person.
I always like Bill Goldman's line about Hollywood. He said there's one thing, and this applies to what we do in a way. He said, always remember this: nobody knows anything.
Wow. Yeah, that's brilliant. That's brilliant. So nothing anybody can tell you about what you're doing, is it?
Well, it's a little bit it's musical in a way.
Yeah, sure.
You just begin to play or whatever it is.
Right.
I remember reading about some of the early suicides of the Rolling Stone band. Yeah. And there were people who would pick up an instrument, take a lot of drugs, and stay up for 30 days and learn the instrument.
And it's a gold record.
It's a gold record, and everybody gets rich. But I thought, is that really? Can you really do that? Can you teach yourself stuff that quickly?
Yeah. I have mixed feelings about telling this, but I think I will. I got a letter just a couple of weeks ago from the wife of a real giant of American letters who's now struggling with encroaching dementia and cognitive decline, and she said he can't remember the characters, and he gets confused about what's happening when and where, but he'll still read for hours at a time with huge delight, simply taking joy sentence by sentence. And I could read you that way. Every page of this galley is underlined and marked up just for the gold in the phrases themselves. Somehow,
You don't think you have Alzheimer's, do you?
I'm ready to roll with that. But I guess the point is there are a lot of reasons to read, a lot of ways to read, and that local moment by moment pleasure in that choice of word, or that slightly unusual but ever so appropriate way of looking at something that I have looked past so many times. That's something that is enormously pleasurable for me in reading you.
We know there's certain kinds of literature that you read, and you read with such absorption and pleasure, and then you can't really remember what happened in it. It's like trying to remember a dream or something.
But you remember the taste,
right?
The atmosphere, the character of those passages. And there are writers about you. I don't think I agree entirely, and maybe they're talking more about the long fiction than the short fiction, but there are those who say you started out as a great virtuoso, a great stylist who took pleasure in performing, and that has changed over the years, almost like you're Eric Clapton saying no more fast solos or something like that. It's slow hand from here on.
Right.
Do you feel that about yourself?
Well, I know it's true. And for some reason, I wish I could put my finger on it, I wanted to be a clearer, plainer writer.
Yeah.
And I think this has something to do with where I've lived the last 50 years, which is I didn't want to keep writing things that nobody I knew could read. And I found this by, if you have ranch hands or something, you recommend books to them. You're not going to, frankly, you're not going to give them The Sound of the Fury.
Yeah.
I think I read I read the opening of The Sound of the Fury probably 5 times before I realized it was about golf. And our daughter did practice teaching in this tough town in Florida. She had kids who were living in their cars. And to graduate as seniors, they had to read Moby Dick. And I sort of pictured this sort of, child who, from a single parent household, living in the back of a wrecked car, trying to get through Moby Dick. And I just thought, boy, we're really on the wrong track.
Yeah.
I mean, why not do things that ordinary people can experience without being Illuminati or literati?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. On the other hand, just to play devil's advocate on that, I would never say because a person hasn't been exposed to certain socioeconomic privileges that they wouldn't get a kick out of the bizarreness of that book or the humor of that book or the
Right. That's very possible if you could get them that far into it.
Yeah.
There was a big rancher in the 19th century, Montana, who had a vast library. And he would have these cowboys come up and work for him for part of the year, and he would always let them go into the library. They'd go in, and that was the only entertainment they had. They could take books out whenever they wanted. And when they went back to Texas or where they originally came from, he would tell them, you can have any book you want, even if I have to order them. And he said invariably they asked for Shakespeare.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. Yeah. I just, for the audience, thought I'd pull a few gems just to indulge my pleasure and to spread that vicariously. So, just a handful of and these probably cover a fair number of years too. So slow hand or not, I think these are gems. So, a woman whose clothes are so up to date that they were misunderstood. A narrator saying that when he parts his hair in the middle, it gives him the look of someone who could talk about Jesus with plausible familiarity. Sunbathing women, reflectored heads facing each other like 2 nodding, miserable sunflowers. Right. A man dressed for a wonderful idea he had had the previous evening. A man who wears an investment-grade wedding band. A river whose waters are moving, but not enough to erase the stars from its surface, or the trout sailing like birds over its deep, pebbly bottom.
Oh.
Yeah. But I have another half a page. I could do this all evening. It's really an endless joy. So something that I've been thinking about, that I saw everywhere in here, but you may or may not. I mean, in your nonfiction, you've written so beautifully and so lyrically and so spiritually about the non-human world. While these stories don't take the non-human world often as a primary subject, the one that I mentioned about the woman and the wolves may be, an example of one that does. It seems to me that it's just constantly knocking around the edges of these stories, and that that you are interested in something that interests me profoundly too. And you mentioned, this book of mine that's just coming out, and that's this notion of species loneliness. Mm-hmm. That may be a huge percentage of what's messed up about us.
Especially lately, I should say.
Yeah, is this mistaken belief that we're here by ourselves and everything else is just a resource. Mm-hmm. And you take a story. I mean, there are a lot of these stories where what's happening to the neurotic and dysfunctional people as they either exploit or successfully stabilize their negotiations with other people is happening concurrently with little glimpses of that the characters may or may not get, of this magnificent along-sidedness of the non-human. Mm-hmm. And you have the lightest touch in suggesting that if they just turned their heads and stopped for a moment, that so much of what is driving them and making them nuts would be ameliorated or at least addressed in a different way. Does that resonate at all with you?
Well, it does in the sense that, as we sort of try to exterminate ourselves,
Right.
And we're getting a lot of help lately, I find it reassuring to know that the greatest biomass on Earth are bugs.
Yeah.
And invariably patient bugs.
The greatest biomass, the greatest diversity, the greatest collection of tricks, of behavioral and chemical tricks. I mean,
Right.
it's just a world that should, if we could somehow see it and
We can't. We're on our way
that's
up.
it. But also we like things that look like us.
Yeah.
And we're just sort of fashioned, unless it moves quickly and is roughly our size, it's not interesting.
Well, I was telling this silly anecdote to Gabrielle today about smoking pot. We're talking about being potheads back in our childhood. And I made this experiment. My kids said, "Wait, Dad, you don't drink. You should smoke some pot. Relax in the evening." So I bought some marijuana, and of course I'd forgotten how to roll a joint. So where do you go when you want to roll a perfect joint these days? The magazine section of the New York Times. They had teach you how to do it. So I rolled, and I didn't know how powerful marijuana becomes since I reached adulthood. And so I rolled this thing up, and I went to our little local shrimp boat, and I bought these shrimp, and I brought them back. It was a beautiful evening in Florida. I was sitting out on the grass screen porch, and I cooked up these shrimp, these beautiful big shrimp right out of the ocean, and then I smoked this big fat thing, and I looked over, and I had this moment where I realized the shrimp really hated me. This thing they were doing with their tentacles, because they're right off the boat. So I thought, they really hate me. They don't want me to live. And so I went in. I mean, I was miserable. I went back and I lay in my bed, and I thought, oh, please, I'll never do this again. I promise. And but the residual thing was that I recognized, it's true. They hate us.
Let me try to spin that in a slightly more productive way. I mean, the realization that nature's agency and desire and narrative is not ours.
Yeah.
Has to be. I mean, we have to come around to that, or we're not going to be here very long.
No, we're not going to be here very long.
Well, okay, I'll take that out of the condition.
Right.
But I mean, you have a great line. It's the narrator in Galton Canyon. I think he says, "I'm always encouraged when I see animals doing anything except run for their lives."
Oh, I know.
Yeah.
Well, we live in a place that the Indians lived and loved. It was an area that was very actively used by the Indians. There were times when we were raising our children, the kids are out there running around and they're floating in the irrigation ditches and the river's going by, and it seems so beautiful. And I think there were generations of people who've been here and they're gone, and their children felt the same way. They felt the same way, and they were much more, now we have very few people who are still attached to the earth in any way. I mean, these great idealistic things that we're doing, like bringing the internet to Africa. The last people in the world that have any contact with nature, and we're going to give them the internet and really get them out of there as fast as we can. But I've had this really melancholy feeling, partly about mortality and about the brevity of human life, to see these signs that there were people, we don't even know who they were, but they were here for a long, long time, having the same feelings about the place that we have.
So this would be my redemptive reformulation of they hate us. They hate us as we are because we don't even know what they're up to.
Yeah.
But here's McGuane on his own ranch, which is a slightly more optimistic formulation of coming to terms with a world that is not operating on your terms. So you say, when you first started ranching, He said, the land doesn't care whether you stay or go or flourish. And then you get this feeling of being relegated to what nature is going to do. And you begin to like it. You like the feeling of living in a cycle that is more important than you are. And that has a kind of rhythmic quality, an internal quality that is reassuring. So there can be some concord there. I mean, the Thoreau, the Thoreau imperative: live in each season as it passes. You know, breathe the air, drink the drink, eat the fruit. Resign yourself to the influence of the earth.
Mm-hmm. I wonder what you do, though, if you live where you can't see it, you know. I mean, where is it? You know, where's the plant?
Exactly. And, you know, walking through this city for the last 2 days, how could you ever find that rhythm again?
Well, you know, there are people, there are great bird watchers in New York City who, you know, have a big, long life lists, you know all about these cycles of birds coming and going seasonally and stuff like that. And there are people who manage to maintain that contact.
And the street trees are incredible.
Right.
I mean, you could, I mean, it's an encyclopedia out there.
Yeah,
if you
I know
want
it.
to. Yeah. Okay, so my mother used to tell us, I love all you kids exactly the same, each in your own way, which I knew even at the age of 7 to be complete and utter, what's the word I'm looking for?
Bullshit.
Prevarication, that's
right.
it. You have any favorites when you went back?
When I look back at these stories?
Yeah.
I'm not really. You know, I could answer that better about the novels that you tend to take up for the ones that were less successful.
Yeah.
Because you think that they need you,
right.
which they don't. But I don't really have favorites. I'm always kind of surprised. You know, there's a story that you really like in this collection I haven't thought about in years. And I'm glad you italicized it for me so I go back and look at it. And in fact, I did kind of like it. I'm glad it came to life for me a little bit again. But you know, they're just kind of notes you made on the road. You know, and you hope. Somebody once said that in art, whether it's literature or any other kind of art, we're sort of in the consciousness business. If you wonder what life was like in the 1920s, or the feeling, the atmosphere of life in the 1920s, and you look at movies or read newspapers, you're not probably going to get much of a feeling for it. But if you read The Great Gatsby, you'll find something that was captured that is indelible, and really gives you a chance to understand how people lived and how you might have lived under those circumstances, because that thing which only writing can do can take the lightest impression of the days of your own life and give them some durability.
Yeah. Which actually leads to my final question before we open the floor. Okay. Living well versus writing well. Writing well versus living well.
Yeah.
And I used to tell every class that I taught, you know, when you're on your deathbed, they're not going to be standing around your deathbed because they liked your second novel.
Yeah, right.
Right.
What a grim thought.
And the students never believed me.
Yeah.
That shot my credibility on everything
right.
else that I had to say to them. You actually have lived a life apart from writing.
I have. I mean, I've been a lucky person, I think. In fact, I got interviewed about a year ago, and the guy in it said, "What, you know, what do you hope for at the moment of your death?"
Right.
Oh, I said it was easy. I said, a surprise.
There's a lovely place to end. So if you have a question, there's a live mic over here, and we can take a few before we wrap up.
Paul, do we have any more water close by? Don't make any effort, please. Or no worries if not.
Who wants to ask a good question?
Oh, I'm making somebody go do that, aren't I?
First brave soul.
You're going to be so sick of me.
Well, a fairly good question.
We can't see out there really
Right.
very well.
Are there any ringers in the audience?
Hi, it's not about short stories, but I know that for many years you corresponded with Jim Harrison, and I was wondering if you will ever publish that correspondence or whether that would be something left for some posthumous activity.
Well, that's a question I've heard a lot, actually. But what was remarkable is that Jim and I, for reasons best known to us, I guess, wrote letters back and forth at least every week for a half century.
Wow.
And Jim's kind of wanted to publish them. I kind of don't want to publish them. Jim was always very aware that these were going to be read someday as part of the document. And I remember back when we were young, he would always have things, he'd always make carbon copies of everything and store everything. And I was very careless in my letters, saying all sorts of things I wouldn't want anybody to read. And Jim's letters were magnificent, but they did not take that sort of autobiographical risk. I think they will eventually come out after I get the big surprise I mentioned earlier, the big one. But there's lots of them. I can't imagine anybody burrowing their way through them.
Have you done so recently, or have you looked them over recently?
Not really.
No.
Not. In fact, I still have lots of them that haven't found their way into the archives. Jim was a fantastic letter writer and a fantastic talker, and just a fantastic interactor. I mean, he just interacted with everybody and everything around him. And we disagreed about so many things, but we were lifelong friends. And he certainly leaves a tremendous hole for anybody whose life he went through. There was never anybody quite like him. He was, I think, really a great poet. I have lots of arguments with some of his novels, and some of them I loved. But in general, I think he was a marvelous poet, and I think he's an oddly under-recognized poet. He was never part of the poetry establishment, and I think that's been a kind of a blanket on his reputation, but that won't last. Do we have any other quizzical book people? Yes.
Back there.
Since we all seem to be stunned silence by the literary qualities of this conversation, I wanted to give you an opportunity to talk to us about cutting horses.
Oh, cutting horses. Well, it's hard to say anything about them quickly, but I think that any of us who love animals and want to find ways to be really close to animals and understand animals, training and riding cutting horses is kind of in a world of its own, because to get anything accomplished as a cutting horse rider, you have to not only think the way your horse thinks, but you have to recognize when your horse is thinking the way you think. And you first notice things like when you're working cattle and your horse is working correctly and you're watching what he's watching, and you look over here and the horse loses his concentration because he knows you moved your eyes. So as you go through these layers of proximity to the consciousness of another animal, it doesn't have to be a horse, but cutting horses are a great lesson in that feeling. And it also it enlarges your love of the non-human and other animals, and you get a much greater sense of their sentience as co-inhabitants of the earth. Yeah. And that was a kind of a breakthrough for me. I didn't know had been a roper, and riding rope horse is very different. A rope horse is a tool to catch a steer, but cutting horses are intellectually kind of. First of all, they're smart in ways that we don't understand. If you ride up a trail in 19 68, and then you ride up the same trail, but somebody's cut a tree down 10 miles below snow line, the horse will stop and look and say, where did that tree go?
Oh my goodness.
We can't do that. We can't remember the things. You begin to question why we think ours is the only kind of intelligence that matters when you understand animals better. That was one of the things I got from cutting horses. Now it's mongrels. I feel I'm a mongrel myself. But we have a lot of dogs and horses and cats. We're surrounded by them all the time. I think it's a very consoling way to live. Well, I think we've done it.
It's a wrap.
Thank you very much.